Firstly, just like to thank you all for joining us. We've got folks, quite a large group on the line today. So for those who are in Australia and New Zealand, good afternoon. For some of those in the Asia Pacific, good morning and good evening to, I think we've got 3 folks listening in from the US. For those who maybe haven't joined us before, my name is Mark Bragg. My business partner is Martin West. We've been working together for about 10 years now, and our primary focus of our business has been to try and help companies execute their strategy. And clearly, whilst being involved in that, the issue of culture always becomes one of the key aspects of that. Just a few housekeeping items on the webinar. We usually go for about 20 or 30 minutes. I think this one probably will take 30 minutes. We realise you've got busy days, so we try and be as efficient as we can. You'll notice on your control panel that there's a place there for you to actually raise your hand. Although we've got a lot of people online, I do like to try and make it as interactive as we can. So I can open up the mics for just about everyone that's on the line. So if you've got a question or a comment, please just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll try to get to you. If for some reason you happen to lose the connection, don't worry about it. If you just click back on the link, you should be able to rejoin. So just a bit of a revision, and for those who have joined us before, they will know this, but you know, our business has pretty much been focused just on one thing, and that's helping the clients we work with close the gap between what they plan to do and what actually occurs in practice, and there's always this gap. And usually to do that, we try and bring a very specific discipline to it, and that is regardless of whether it's a senior management team, a small frontline team, or an entire company, we're just trying to get 3 things done. That's ensuring that everyone we have in the group is completely focused on the right things, which often means not only discussing what the right things are, but removing those things that are getting in the way. The second thing is to get visibility on performance. And then the third thing is to build a very strong meeting discipline. Now, even with the clients where we've been extremely successful, they've focused on these 3 things and it's gone well. But in reality, there is one thing that always seems to be able to stand in the way of good performance, regardless of what discipline you introduce. And that's culture. And there's, I think, you know, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a number of occasions where leadership teams and leaders have tried to put very specific disciplines in place, but for some reason the culture is not quite right, and it causes all kinds of issues. So I just want to focus our attention on that today, and what I will do in the short time we have is just try and go through and try and help you define culture in a very simple way. I want to give you a very simple approach to team culture, because obviously many of you on the line will be thinking about your teams and perhaps those things you might be able to do to improve it. I'm going to give you a short culture workshop agenda you might like to run with your team. It's very simple and straightforward. And then there's also a bit of a process that you can put in place to use with your team to constantly look at how the culture is going and what you might be able to do to improve. So first of all, just defining team culture. I've got a question for you. I'm going to show you some workplaces that we've worked in, and they're very different cultures. And as you look at these slides of these workplaces, I'd just like you to think about, if you were looking at these people working, what would you be looking for to try and evaluate their culture? What exactly would you look at? So let me just show you these quick slides, and then I'll maybe, if anyone's interested to make a comment after I've shown you, you can just raise your hand and I'll open the mic for you. So first one is an oil rig. One of the things we've noticed about oil rigs, surprisingly, they move very, very slowly. The men and the women that work on them are very considered. They take their time doing things, even though it looks like it's busy. But it's very, very controlled and a very disciplined environment. Second one that we've spent quite a bit of time in over the last 10 years is boardrooms. They're always very interesting places to watch how teams work in boardrooms, and obviously the culture in these things varies dramatically. Often, as you will appreciate, there's a lot of egos involved, and that's always interesting to view in terms of the culture of an organisation. Third one is really interesting. I think the new IT startups and some of the culture that they have around their workspaces and the way they work is new and exciting, and we've had the opportunity to work with a few, particularly in Silicon Valley, and I'm always excited to see how they've sort of developed new places to work, new environments to work in. And then the third one is an operating theatre. We actually haven't worked in an actual operating theatre, but we've had quite a bit of time with some hospital management teams here in Sydney, and they're quite interesting too, because there's obviously a lot of people with experience in nursing, and one of the things we've found quite interesting about the leadership teams in hospitals is they seem to be able to make quick decisions and good decisions quickly, which may be reflective of the environment that they're in. So they're four sort of different environments. I'd just like to quickly, again, we haven't got a lot of time, but I'm just going to open up the mic to a few people. And if you were looking at any work environment, what exactly would you be looking at? Let me see if someone's got their hand up here. Might go firstly to Anita. Anita, are you online? Just go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'd look at the way people are speaking to each other, whether they're smiling, whether there's a sort of friendly feel. And for instance, I'd also look at some performance measures. For instance, in the case of the oil rig, so things like safety, because if they were hot, if there was low problems with safety, I think the people are sort of looking out for each other and going along with the procedures and keeping them safe. Yeah. But mainly I'd look at the way people speak to each other and how they speak about their job and the company.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks very much, Anita. Let me just go to see here really quickly. Anyone else got their hand up? Rob Dawes. Let me just go to Rob. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, Bragg, I'm working in the pharmaceutical industry at the moment, and the leader that is leading our team is really building a great culture. I think one of his big processes is having a very strong view around involving the team. All decisions are very much a team-driven process. There's a lot of interaction between the team and involvement. We all feel as though we own the decision, and therefore the culture around that sort of ownership means that we're all absolutely committed to moving forward with it.
Terrific. Okay. So thanks, Rob. We've had quite a bit of time focused on this, and our approach, as most of you that have joined our webinars before or have worked with us in the past will realise, we try to distill these things down and keep them very simple and straightforward, so that a leadership team or a team in itself can work on them quite easily. The definition that we like and kind of wedded to is that we feel like the culture in any team or any organisation is really just simply the sum of individual behaviour. So if I were to come to your workplace and if I had enough time to just watch people interact, to watch how they communicated, as Anita said, to watch how they made decisions, to watch how they dealt with crisis, what are their day-to-day habits, that would pretty much give me a good understanding of what the culture was like. So when you're thinking about culture, you have to think about behaviour. It's almost impossible to separate it. So, and what that really means is, and I'm talking here particularly about performance, is usually when you get failure, it means that the behaviour that's actually occurring within the team or within the company doesn't match what the vision, mission, values, or objectives of the company actually are. And so you've got this disconnect between what the company is actually trying to achieve or what the team is trying to achieve and the behaviour that's actually occurring. So I'm always keen to ask the question of the leaders that we work with, do you think that the behaviour you have, or how would you think you would need to behave to be successful? And sometimes that's quite hard to define. So I'm just going to go through a very simple way to kind of do this, because obviously if you want to change culture, then you have to think carefully about how am I going to change behaviour? There's no other way in my mind that you can actually change the culture of an organisation without looking specifically at the behaviour that exists. So let me just show you a simple way to approach this, and I'm going to give you some examples of companies that we've worked with in the past. Again, if you've got any questions as we go along, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. I'll stop and try and go to you. So a simple approach is this. I mean, the thing is, if you start talking about behaviour and culture, you have to be very, very specific about what is part of your culture and what is not part of your culture. You can't leave any room for grey, doubt or uncertainty. You have to be very clear about this if you want to try and make it work for you. The way we have done this in the past is to encourage teams to actually write down those things they will do and those things they will not do. And I'm going to give you a few examples so that you can begin to understand a little bit what I'm talking about. First example is from an actual listed construction company here in Australia that had a fairly bad loss over a 12-month period of about 1.2 billion over a couple of projects that went wrong. Now, what I'm going to show you is kind of the results of what they came up with in terms of what we will do and what we will not do. Now, essentially, they're not specifically about culture, but it will show you the strength of making statements like this. If you just have a quick read through some of those statements, the we will statements that they came up with, they're very, very clear and very specific about how this team wants to operate and function in the future. Now, the we will statements are relatively clear. Wait till you see the we will not statements. Just have a quick look at these. I mean, they're actually saying very, very specific things about the way this team wants to operate in the future. And they've been very, very clear on a number of fronts. Now, again, this is not necessarily specifically about culture, but a lot of it is to do with how this team's going to operate together and therefore relevant to it. So let me go now to, this is an IT company we work with in San Francisco. CEO is probably mid-30s, average age is in their mid-20s. They're only a young company, but very exciting company and very protective of their culture. This is one of the better cultures that we've ever experienced. And you'll just notice here that, again, just by using the we will and we will not or we do not, they've been very, very specific about what their culture is and what their culture is not. Quite an interesting list there. Okay, so let me just give you one more example. And this is oil and gas company in Dallas, Texas. And as Anita pointed out, if you're in that business, you'll notice their very first one is focused on safety. And that's a big part, obviously, in the oil and gas industry. And then the second thing, of course, is the environment. Another big thing in oil and gas. They really put a high premium on behavior around those two things. So I guess what I'm trying to demonstrate here is just by being very clear about we will do this and we will not do that, well, actually helps be very, very clear about what the culture is and what the culture isn't. So let me just suggest to you, if you're thinking of trying to do something with your teams, what a workshop agenda might look like if you were to try and do something on culture. What I would suggest you do, and again, it depends how many people you have in your group or your team, but I always like to break groups down into little, even if you had 6 people, I would break them into 3 teams of 2 or 2 teams of 3. It just allows people to have a little bit more of a say than if you get a group discussion with 10 or 15 people. So the first exercise is just to, draw 3 lines down a page, and on the left-hand column put what do we want to keep doing that we really like? What should we stop doing relative to our culture? And what should we actually add to what we're doing? That exercise actually is quite effective in terms of just reviewing where people feel the culture is at now. And what it will do is make the next step a little bit easier. Again, in their teams, just ask them to write 4 or 5 statements, not too many, about if they had to define their culture, about the culture that they wanted, and define it in terms of we will do this and we will not do that, and allow them to go to work and leave them a free hand, and then have them come back as a group and present to each other. Third step is really just allow the people to vote. Allow the folks to circle those comments or highlight those ones that they think are specific to their culture or the culture that they want to be in, the ones that resonate with them most, the ones they think are most important to what they're trying to achieve as a group. And eventually you'll probably be able to whittle it down and come up with somewhere between 5 and 10. I think most of the groups we've worked with come up with 10. Personally, I would prefer less. I think you can be a lot more powerful if you have less. But, you know, sometimes you just have to try and cover a lot of bases. So I understand that. So, again, I'm not giving you too much detail here because of our time frame. But if you were to follow that agenda, I think what you might find at the end of it is that you would start to develop a pretty good understanding of your team, the culture that you want to try and develop. And obviously it's just a workshop. It's not going to change everything, but it is a very good point to start from because you're starting to get some clarity on behaviour. So let me go to just one further suggestion, and then I might go to some questions. There is a way that I think people, if you are concerned about your culture or you'd like to try and improve it, it's a very simple method of doing this. And those that joined us in our last webinar will identify this method because we used it for performance as well. What I suggest you do is just somewhere on a whiteboard or maybe a flip chart, just draw a happy face on one side and a sad face on the other. And throughout a week period or a 2-week period, maybe even over a month, just have folks write down those things they like about their team culture and those things they dislike about their team culture. So it might look, here's an example here of a group. I don't know that this group were actually working on culture, but you'll get the idea. Just writing down those things that come to mind about the things they like, the things they dislike. Once they've done that, then just pick one thing that you feel has the greatest impact on the team and drill down on that and try and come up with some ways to improve that one thing. Now, I'm looking at this exercise as something that you might do regularly. You might do it once a month or, you know, once a quarter, or some teams might want to do it more frequently than that. But what you're obviously trying to do here is try and find the 1 or 2 things that are really bugging people, or the 2 things you think are really going to help the culture of the organisation, and you're continually trying to work on that. So you can see in this example that these guys are already starting to identify 2 or 3 things. And obviously the idea is, you know, how can we improve on this? And you're trying to come up with 2 or 3 key things, that actions that might be able to just work on one aspect of your culture at a time. You know, there are a number of companies we work with now on culture, and when we've introduced this method, it's actually helped them a lot, because rather than just do one workshop and then say that's our culture and forget about it, they've actually been able to keep it alive and have been able to address issues that clearly are contrary to the behaviour that people are expecting, or things haven't quite worked out the way they should have. So it's sort of an ongoing method to allow you to, you know, not put a lot of time into it, but you can at least spend, you know, 1 or 2 hours every month or a quarter with your group just talking about this, particularly if you feel like you've got an issue and you need to solve it. Now, oh, by the way, this is that IT team I spoke about. Now, you can see the leader of this particular team is going through this process with his team, and they've used it quite effectively on a number of fronts, not just on culture. So I just want to make one final point, and I'm sure most of you probably have this in the back of your mind anyway, and that is, there is no question in my mind anyway that the culture of an organisation pretty much starts with the leadership. You know, the leadership will set the trend. And my very first lesson, and this came, showing my age a bit, but back in the 80s, when I first started coaching, there was a sports psychologist named Ian Liner who was actually Michael Lynott, the famous Australian rugby union player's father. And Ian was a mentor for me, and one of the very first things he said to me was, the team will be built in your image. In other words, all the strengths, all the weaknesses that you have will in some way be reflected in the way the team behaves, operates, and conducts itself. And that always stayed with me. So if you're in a leadership position, think carefully about the leaders in your team, yourself, and the impact that you may be having on culture. One final point, I know in large organisations it's easy to deflect responsibility to the very top and say, oh, well, that's just the way it is. That's our board or our senior management team that have set the culture. But I think that sometimes can be used as a bit of an excuse, because if you're managing your own team, you have a bit of ability to be able to affect the environment in which they work and the culture that surrounds your group. So don't sort of deflect the responsibility, try and take charge and try and do something with your team. Okay, so just in quick summary, and then I'm going to go back to the field, and if you guys want to raise your hand and ask questions, we're going pretty well for time. We've got about 5 minutes left, but just a quick summary. If you think about culture being directly related to behaviour, and if you're understanding that if you want to change the culture, you actually have to change behaviour. Not an easy thing to do, always a challenge, but in order to make a start, you really have to be very clear and concise about what it is you do want in your culture and what it is you don't want. And if you can use those statements, as I've suggested, beginning sentences with we will or we will not, it will actually help define in a much clearer way exactly the culture you want. If you can put into place that little exercise I suggested about working consistently at what you people like, what they don't like, and trying to find ways to get a little bit better, I think that's a nice exercise for any team to have. And then ultimately, as I've just said, the leadership is going to determine the culture, and you need to be very conscious of that, particularly if you're in a leadership position. We're probably going to do our next webinar just on culture for the leadership team, which is not significantly different from what we've covered today, but there are some specific things relative to leadership that we think are important. So, guys, I'm just going to open up again and ask questions. I know some folks are not always keen to talk on these things, but if you've got a question, please just raise your hand, and I'll just open up the mic. I've got a couple of final points before we sign off here, but let's just see if we've got questions first. Let me go back to Anita. Just really quick, Anita. You're online, Anita. Go ahead. Maybe she's not online. Okay, let me try. Let me go back to Rob. Go ahead, Rob. Questions?
Yeah, Bragg, you've got a challenge coming up. The pharmaceutical company I'm working with, we're on the verge of implementing Salesforce.com. We currently have a culture of non-compliance with CRM programs, and we've recognised that the software is outstanding, but our most significant challenge by far is going to be the cultural change.
Yeah.
It's going to be a process. So, the workshop process you've just worked us through, I think, will be really helpful in helping identify how we're going to implement that change and bring the behavioural change that comes with the cultural change to ensure we're successful. But it's going to be a significant challenge, I feel.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think any system and process you put in place is actually asking people to change their behaviour. So, and that's always the challenge with these things. That's great, Rob. Thank you. One last question before we just meet our 30-minute timeline. Just got Dave Kippen on the line. Let's see if I can hear Dave. I can't seem to quite unmute him. I might come back to Dave. Let me go to Anita again. Go ahead, Anita.
Yeah, I was thinking, Mark, that even just the process of outlining the behaviours that you will and won't do would probably in itself create some sort of shift in behaviour, because you're making them so conscious and aware.
Yeah, that's a good point, Anita. I need to we just lost you a little bit online then, but I think we got the
Just the process of doing the we will and we won't would create some shift, I would think.
Correct. I mean, it's the interesting thing about this is in the workshops we've been in, at least, once people start to talk about this stuff, they tend to actually think very carefully about their own behaviour, which is obviously the intention of raising the topic in the first place. I'm just going to try and go to Dave Kipper one more time, just see how we go here. Dave, can we hear you? Maybe not. Okay. Well, folks, just one final thing. If you or your teams feel like you need a hand with this, we run a fairly concise and we think fairly effective workshop that takes about a day. It's just designed specifically on culture and getting team alignment, and then giving you the tools to actually continue to work on this to improve it. And if you with no commitment, no obligation, if you just want to chat about this, we're more than happy to get on the phone or even meet personally. So if you're interested in those things, just send me a quick email, and I'll be more than happy to try and help if we can. So thanks very much, guys. The next steps are we will actually email you a video of this webinar for reference. If you want to share it with anyone, please feel free to do so. And if you have got any questions or comments, please feel free to just email me at any time. I'll be only more than happy to try and help. So thanks again, guys. And I think our next webinar is probably in about 3 weeks' time, but we'll certainly advise you in due course. Thanks again, and have a great Friday afternoon. Cheers.